Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cambro Conversations. And today's conversation, it is just me with a solo podcast, 26 questions to get through and some really interesting ones along the way. Let's get started without any faffing around. Question one, how long have you been journaling now? You don't talk about it as much. Are you still doing it? Yes, simply I am. I started journaling in March 2020. So that's over 18 months ago now. I've actually completed 3 full 6-minute diaries, which is the journal format that I use. And I'm on to my 4th one. I did draft a post about 1 year of journaling back in April time, but I decided not to post it. It wasn't quite right. I wasn't sure what I was saying on it. I talked a little bit around the benefits, and they have been significant for me, particularly helping me frame how I feel about contributing to supporting others around me, which is an important thing for me. And I think there's elements of journaling that feel semi-private, and it's very, very personal to the individual in terms of what they benefit from when they do journal. I'm going to share more of it on my Insta stories again, trying to encourage people that that's what I'm doing and that's what's helping me morning and night. And I think if people are looking to understand a bit more about journaling, episodes where I cover it include one with Johnny Rose, which is episode 17, and then more recently, Danny Miranda, which is episode 71. And that's certainly an interesting one, as well as I think 74 with Ed Cunningham, who's in need to read. The post I wrote in April would maybe have been better as a video. So I'm thinking about whether I record lessons and benefits and cons that I've seen from journaling over the last year, but now 18 months if I do a refresh of it. So if people be interested in that, please let me know if you'd be interested in hearing a video on that. Question 2, any specific low points in podcasting? Overall, not many at all that come to mind, but strangely, at the end of August, I actually had a 2-week lull where I didn't record any episodes at all. Some of the guests I approached didn't want to come on. They didn't agree to come on, and I felt a little bit lost in which guest I wanted to have. But fortunately, in the last couple of weeks, I've had 2 really interesting guests recorded, which will come out after this episode, and I've got a 3rd and a 4th booked for late September, which are really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to releasing those. The 2 weeks probably came about in terms of that kind of lull in recording, but not releasing. I still kept up my weekly uploads because I had some target guests that didn't feel that the size and the scale of the podcast was an appropriate use of their time. So that was a little bit hard to take, but I know the journey that this podcast is on, and I know where we're looking to go in terms of having a positive impact on those that do tune in, rather than worrying about getting another 100, another 1,000, another 2,000, another 3,000, another 10,000 subscribers. I'm just happy with the kind of steady growth and positive impact that it has. Now, as a milestone, we have over 111 5-star reviews. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please go and add to that and leave a written review, because that does help show guests that alongside the number of downloads it gets, it is a valuable podcast and that people are engaged when they listen to this. So if you want to help me get more high quality guests, then please do share this episode or share an episode you've enjoyed with a friend and leave a 5-star review if you listen on Apple, because it helps me get some more quality guests for the podcast. But that was a bit of a low point, but very much just a bump in the road in terms of making sure that I do all the right things to get the best possible guests and the best possible conversations. Question 3, when was the last time you cried? Well, I actually been asked if I've been crying recently, because I had an allergic reaction. For those watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see under my eyes. I'm just showing you just now. I had an allergic reaction about 2 weeks ago to a caffeine solution I was using to help with the bags under my eyes, and it's been pretty inflamed ever since, so much so that I went to the pharmacy today to try and get something to get that down, and we're working on that. But I wasn't 100% sure where this question came from, but I suppose that there are times that I come across as somebody who's quite in control of my emotions, so maybe wouldn't be expected to cry, but that's not strictly true. There's definitely been a long time in my life at points where I've not been a crier at all. I've just completely refrained from that. And the only times I've really almost allowed myself to used to be in films, strangely, in the cinema primarily, where my phone was away. I allowed myself to not be distracted, and I allowed myself to really emotionally connect with the characters and immerse myself in the story. And Yeah, I think that was when I used to probably let out any emotion I was suppressing in other ways. But recently, I actually cried a little bit today in the car with Ian. He was telling me about an 80-year-old man that he sat next to, or 81-year-old man that he sat next to at the Rangers Leon game, who was telling Ian that it was his first game back since before the pandemic, as he'd actually been going through some ill health. And he kept looking around and saying to Ian how happy he was, and it meant everything to be back seeing his team that he'd first been to a game in, I think, the mid 1940s as a 6-year-old. And his happiness and relief at being home, which he called it, and watch the team that he loved, seems like such a simple, wholesome pleasure. And Ian was listening to him talk about teams of the past, and I just felt a bit emotional thinking about how happy something as simple, going to watch the team that you love, can be for somebody. And that doesn't often happen to me, but yeah, I just I shed a few tears because it was just the way Ian was telling it, and he was quite impacted by it as well. If we're talking about like genuine like floods of tears and like quite a lot of crying, the most recent time that I could probably think of would be in recent memory, and it would be a close friend of mine had a bereavement within their family, and I watched the funeral service over a live stream during the pandemic because of the restrictions, and I was just in my living room in a flood of tears, just overwhelmed by the whole experience. It was really, really touching, and obviously felt very emotionally connected to my friend's plight at that point. Question 4, do you ever listen back to your podcasts? Yes, I normally listen back the week before when I'm preparing the promotional clips that will go up on Instagram and sometimes on YouTube. That doesn't always mean that I'll hear the full episode at that point, though, because I might listen to the first 20 minutes and I've picked 2 clips already that I'm going to use for promotional material, and I just leave it there. But I absolutely always listen on the Sunday morning, usually when I go for a quick walk or when I'm cooking up my meal prep on a Sunday. And it's mostly to listen back and assess my own performance and understand, am I overusing certain phrases? Are there questions I could have been more direct or clear with? Did I listen to the guest as well as I could and really delve into what they said? Or did I just move on to another question? It's a constant attempt to give myself feedback and understand the process better and improve that. I've got past the stage of cringing at hearing everything you say when you're on camera or on audio. And that mostly came from back in 2016. I used to film or record myself doing sales calls when I first started to do new business. And wow, that was a painful experience. And I certainly am glad I've gone through that, because now I listen back to the podcast. I don't hate everything that I say and how I sound, but I am listening to what I've said, how I've said it, and how I've delivered something. And sometimes I will cringe about that and I'm like, oh, Colin, I need to do better at that. But yeah, I do listen back to my podcasts. Question 5, dumbbells or barbells? For me, it's dumbbells. I love unilateral work wherever possible. Barbells always have their place, but dumbbells, it makes it easier to manage injuries and imbalances. It improves the symmetry of both your aesthetics and how you look, but also your performance in terms of both sides of the body, whichever movement you're doing, being as equally strong as possible is always a positive for me. Question 6, will you be doing 29 lessons on your 29th birthday this year? Yes, I'll do that post on Instagram again. I've done that the last couple of years and I've enjoyed doing that. There's usually some overlap year to year, but I think there should be, unless there's been a radical shift in how my life has been lived or my perspective has shifted entirely on like a large number of matters, then I would expect there to be some overlap in what you saw last year and what you saw the year before. And hopefully my 30 lessons at 30 in 2022 will have some overlap as well. 7, have you ever thought much about couples living their life on Insta, but rarely taking time off it, or making it appear as if their life is perfect, but maybe not the same behind closed doors? I think the way this question is framed and phrased perhaps leans towards a bias against sharing a lot on your relationship on Instagram. And I can certainly understand that perspective, but I'm sure there's plenty of couples out there that are sharing quite a lot and still are in reality very, very happy. My own insight would be, from a personal perspective, you can absolutely overshare and you can expose yourself too much. And privacy is underrated on Instagram. especially when you've got a page where you feel almost compelled to post content. Some things you just don't need to post. But I still appreciate that while privacy is important, it's important to be transparent as well, and that can be valuable. But being present in the moment is something I think is a superpower in 2021, and it will be moving forward because of all the distractions that we have. In the last 2 years, I've tried not to post when I've been with somebody at the time that I'm with them. By that, I mean, I've maybe been out dating and I've taken photos while I've been there, but I've waited until I've been away from the situation and the person until I've posted it on social media, meaning that I'm not jumping onto an app and losing the focus and the enjoyability of the situation with the person that I'm with in order to post something quickly on Instagram and put the location and tag somebody or tag a restaurant or tag wherever I am. The part of the question around talking about life being perfect and making it appear as there's nothing bad going on behind closed doors is quite a funny one. And I'm not sure where people will land on this, and I'd love to know your thoughts. But I do not expect anybody to post the bad times on social media because I don't expect it of myself. I wouldn't do it myself. So if I was fighting with my partner, you're not going to be seeing that on social media. If I was having an argument with my girlfriend, you wouldn't know about it. I mean, I'm single at the moment, but if I was arguing with my girlfriend, I would not be sharing that on social media, and neither would you, largely. So I don't think you're ever likely to see somebody put forward a situation where you think there is problems behind closed doors. There's no doubt that this happens, though, where people actually increase the frequency of their kind of coupley posts when they're going through rocky patches. I've got a couple of couples that I'm fairly close with. I know there's a strong correlation over the years where when one of them's in the bad books, the amount of kind of documented posts about their partner goes up through the roof. And that seems to me like small compensation for what's going on behind closed doors if there's fighting or arguing. But it is a way of publicly signaling a level of commitment, which could help. So I do understand it from that perspective as well. Question 8, what's the best golf course that you've played? This is a loaded question from the person that's asked me this, and they'll be hoping, and I think they'll be pleased to hear that my answer is my favourite golf course that I played, maybe not the best, is Shiskin on the Isle of Arran. It's in Blackwaterfoot on the Isle of Arran. It's a 12-hole course. It is incredibly quirky, lots of blind shots, lots of little burns and some pretty devastating rough. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world, and somewhere that I grew up playing a lot of golf when I used to go on holiday with my family there as a kid. I've not played a lot of championship courses, and ones that are probably notable mentions would be West Kilbride, Glasgow Gales, and probably Archerfield as well. Those are the 3 in Scotland that are like championship level golf courses that I've played. I do definitely need to go and play more of the ones in St Andrews and your Turnberries and your Carnousties. I've not been exposed to that. I'm quite a stickler for playing my home course, enjoying myself, maybe playing something local in Glasgow with a friend who's a member there. But I will be broadening my horizons. But the answer at this moment in time, and if you do get to play some golf in the Isle of Arran, it would be Shiskin. What an incredible, incredible golf course. Question 9, how important is timing of pre and post workout food? Weight loss and weight gain wise, in terms of like calories in, calories out, energy balance, it's almost entirely redundant. It doesn't really matter. When it comes to your weight loss and your weight gain, it's pretty much entirely about what you eat across the course of the day. So that could be all pre-workout, all post-workout, or it could be 8 hours after your workout that you eat all your food. It doesn't really matter in terms of actual pure weight on the scale and maybe how you look. But importantly, performance-wise and subsequently body composition, how you look, will be based on how you manage your food around your workout. And I think it's underrated. In my book, how well you eat in and around your training is something that a lot of people dismiss because it is sometimes difficult to get right. People get it terribly, terribly wrong. And I encourage people to think about how they feel up before a session and feel ready to push hard and perform, and their body's in the right space to do that. So if you're a morning trainer and you're training first thing in the morning when you wake up, thinking about what that high quality meal is the night before in terms of some slow digesting carbohydrates fueling you through the next day into the morning. Or if you're training during the day, it's the meal that you're having during the day before you train needs to be of an adequate composition of protein and carbohydrates to fuel that session and make sure that you're feeling strong. And then post workout and afterwards is less about performance and more about recovery so that you can perform the next day or the days afterwards. So it's about getting an adequate amount of protein in within about an hour and a half after you train, which for most people is not a problem. But I think it's underrated in terms of its importance. Like, a lot of people try and reduce the importance of it so that it sounds easier, and that's all well and good if the goal is purely just a little bit of weight loss. Don't worry too much about it. But if you want to get the kind of maximal muscle tissue and the maximal like performance in the gym, you should be looking after what you eat before and after. Question 10, do you find it natural to get up and get after it? I was never a morning person at all growing up. That may come as a surprise to people now who know that I'm out for my walk first thing in the morning. I'm an early riser on weekends. I'm playing golf. That was never the case when I was younger. In fact, it was a bit of a joke in my family that I would roll out of bed before school and get a lift up to school from my mom and really be terrible. And even at university, at like 17, 18, 19, 20, maybe even just before I turned 21, I was dreadful. 9 o'clock lectures were a real struggle. And that was largely started to change when I was about a few months into working, and I started going for a walk before work because it gave me a reason to get up and move and work towards this activity goal for the day. But it also meant I was exposed to light first thing in the morning, natural light. And I started to develop a more steady circadian rhythm, which meant I had a consistent sleeping time and a consistent waking time, and my body clock responded accordingly. And I guess I was influenced by people who I deemed successful, who were productive first thing in the morning. And I had good examples around me. My brother and my dad are both very early risers, very much naturally comes to them. But that's because they have consistent sleep and wake times as well. And even those people that I saw on the internet were doing similar. I had stuff closer to home to see that it can be easy to get up earlier when you go to bed earlier and you have a consistent sleep and wake. So of course, having that thing to look forward to in terms of that walk in the morning, even those kind of wet, damp Scottish winter days, is very important for me. And although I'm not always champing at the bit to get up and sell furniture and talk about these things, I still have things to look forward to within my day. I look forward to the walk. I look forward to my podcast. I look forward to writing my thoughts down in my journal. And I look forward to reviewing my to-do list. And I look forward to progressing what I'm up to. That could be anything. So for me, what made me more likely to get up and get after it was having a positive structure, and particularly the exposure to light first thing in the morning. Number 11, what would be your best advice for uni graduates? If this is purely in relation to career and career development, I would start to build discipline around your working week. Unfortunately, university is a little bit of a bubble. It's a fantastic time. There's so much flexibility, there's so much freedom. It allows a lot of scope for other activities. But when you get into working, what is typically 9 to 5 with a commute either side, depending if you're working in an office or working at home, you need to build a little bit of discipline into your week and some structure around your mornings and your evenings in order to make the most of the time that you have available. And that, in my opinion, should include exercise and nutrition, preparation for nutrition as a priority to support the additional stress that's going to come onto you through working full time, because it's going to differ from the stress that you have at university. Yes, dissertations in your final year at university are likely to be very stressful, but the lead time on a dissertation or an exam is always known, and it's quite long and extended. In sharp contrast, the stressors at work are short, sharp, and regular, and they're less likely to have long lead times. They kind of just come wave after wave after wave. In my opinion, exercise and nutrition will provide a really, really good support system for that, to mean that you get the best out of some of the pressured situations in the work environment that you go into. The first few months you're working are a bit of a shock to the system, in my opinion, as a uni graduate, because unless you did a degree that's very much a lot of class hours, maybe like engineering or something like that. My friends that did engineering had a lot of class hours, medicine, whereas social sciences, English literature, other courses that are a little bit more fluent in their class timetable and expect a lot of self-study, clocking in 9 till 5 in work was a big change for me. If we're talking about in terms of development for young graduates, in terms of their own approach within their career, I think you'll quickly suss out which colleagues around you can learn the most from. And with that in mind, you can spend time asking them questions and exploring topics, using them a little bit as a mentor figure, officially or unofficially, depending on what it is. But away from actual formal learning within work and training, I would look at non-formal learning in your time away from the desk, because that's going to be vital to move you forward and help you progress quicker within your workplace, and also bring in a skill set that maybe some of your colleagues don't have. For me, podcasts and YouTube play a massive role in that. They're very, very helpful to allow you to search and look for things and find specific topics and specific sources which can aid you in your development. Alongside that, of course, you've got books. Of course, the searchability for books is a little bit more challenging compared to podcasts and YouTube, but they will definitely have their place. So investing in these sources and being really curious with your colleagues and different topics to enable you to get better will be a great way to fast track your progress and really contribute to your new employer. Beyond that, if we're looking at financially, I would strongly encourage people to think about investing at a young age, giving themselves more likelihood of being financially free in the future. And by starting at that age when it comes to investment and saving and thinking about where your money's going with your first kind of real salary, it will allow you to have some freedom to make bolder moves and decisions with some of the financial cushioning that you can build up later down the line, whether that you decide to move job, you decide to move city, you decide to start a side hustle with some of the funds you've got, you decide to buy a property. That would be a big recommendation for me to be financially literate at an early stage in your career. I started investing a couple of years into my career. Before that, I was a really, really diligent saver. Even at university, I was a saver. I actually came out of university with some funds because I lived at home. And when I worked, I just shoveled the money away. And I saved my entire deposit for my flat in the first 3 years of working. But I wish I'd invested some of that, because that just sat in an ISA and got like 1% at most return per year. Whereas if I'd invested, I maybe got a wee bit more. Question 12, favorite alternative training style outside weights? If we're talking about general physical activity, then I love walking and I love playing golf. So that's my kind of physical activity sports away from weights. But if we were talking about like a focused training style that I would enjoy apart from weightlifting, it would probably be these CrossFit influenced functional fitness workouts and blasts, like an EMOM or an AMRAP or some sort of timed exercises that involve me stretching myself. Now, a lot of these will involve lifting weights, but it's lifting weights in a very different way from a hypertrophy or strength session. And they also tend to involve cardio equipment like the ski erg or the assault bike or the rower, and some body weight movements as well, which challenge you in different modalities. So that would be my kind of backup to my traditional hypertrophy sessions, which I do continue to love. Question 13. When you're not feeling your best, how do you get yourself to snap out of it? I honestly think if somebody can figure this out for themselves on a consistent basis, then you'll perform really, really well, because nobody is just feeling absolute peak all the time. Don't get me wrong. I feel I'm quite level, and I have times where I pop up. I've just spoken to you about the 2 weeks where I didn't record a podcast because I had a few knocks, a few rejections, and it took me a wee while to get back on the horse and going in the right direction again. But largely, day to day, if I am not feeling my best, the way to improve that and snap out of it is what I would call state change. And by that, I mean making a change in either the environment that you're in or some form of trigger to make a change to the mindset or perspective that you hold at that point in time. To do that, it could be something as simple as going for a walk. It could be standing up. So if you're working and you're feeling a slump, it could be standing up and working while standing up, or it could be standing up and leaving that desk and coming back to it in a moment. It could be going to train. It could be writing down the things that are going on inside your head and getting it out on paper and putting forward a plan of action to change the state of mind that you've got. Or even it could be watching or reading something that inspires, motivates, or educates you on a topic that's going to move you positively in the right direction. And the last one I would say when it comes to state change, and although it's not easy to get this one right, is talking to somebody about not quite feeling it, who will sometimes give you some tough love or some really educated, easy suggestions on how to move forward in a better light. Question 14, what are your top 3 book recommendations? Before I give you my 3, I'm going to caveat all of this by saying that the same book will impact everyone differently at different times in their lives. I actually spoke about this with Yusuf Smith on a recent episode where I read The Power of Now at university and it just meant nothing to me. Whereas I read it after university when I was thinking more about being present and feeling in the moment, and it registered a lot more. And I'll give some context. So my first recommendation is Atomic Habits. It's a one-stop shop for understanding behavior change, understanding how to develop better and more effective systems and routines, which will help you work towards a better life and whatever goals that you care about. But I've read Atomic Habits twice. Luckily, and in this particular book, it's that good that I got a lot of benefit both times. But the second time I read it, I was questioning some of the ways that I was living. I was questioning, like, am I too regimented? Am I too routined? What can I do to get rid of some of these bad habits? And it reinforced what I needed to hear at that point in time. So importantly, when you do read a book, it might not work for you at that point in time, but sometimes just earmark it for another time when maybe you need it. The second book I would recommend was the first self-development book that really hit home with me, and that was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It really is the entry level to self-development for myself and also many others that I've spoken to, including on this podcast. I think standing out amongst that is my friend Bryce Bell, who is not a voracious reader at all, but swears by the impact that this one particular book had on his approach to his life. It's completely timeless in its advice because it is an old book now, but the lessons and principles within it are applicable even now. The last recommendation is going to be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and that is just the ultimate exercise in perspective, talking and learning from somebody who went through the Holocaust and the frankly terrible periods during the lead up to World War II and during World War II. That's my 3 books, but like I say, pick and choose books that are right for you at the right time. Question 15, what episode are you proud of recording and why? Before I hit recording this one, I was thinking about this question. I had to really rack my brains, but the immediate one that sprung to mind was actually Joe Delaney, or Shred Bundy as he's known on Instagram. Joe was somebody I'd looked up to for a long period of time, and I'd loved watching his content on YouTube for so long, particularly as a younger man who was shaping himself in terms of how he thought and how he felt and how he behaved in his training and the kind of things that he did, like going to Ibiza on holiday. He'd only ever been a guest on one other podcast because I'd gone looking. And over the years, for him to only appear on one podcast meant I had to make quite a strong case to get him to come on Cambro Conversations. So that was very reassuring and made me quite proud that he was interested in doing that because of the discussions that I had with him before. And on the podcast, if you haven't listened, it was a great chat. And I managed to not fanboy or like pander to his ego or like really like suck up to him too much. I have like tremendous respect for Joe, but I managed to have a good conversation where I brought out valuable insights while still recalling things and prompting topics that somebody who was a very close follower of his over the years would know about. So I think that was an episode I'm proud of how I handled that. The other episode that jumped to mind when I asked this question was with Andrew Craig, episode 42. That is the number one episode for any listener that's wanting to improve their financial future. And that for me is something to be proud of because of how powerful it can be in a number of messages that I've had about how much it's benefited people with their money management. Question 16, what professional red and green flags do you have? Red being avoid and green being get to know or pursue. So professional, I take that to mean regarding doing business with or working alongside as a colleague. And the red flags for me for going into business with somebody or working with a client would be things like leading the discussion purely on driving costs down from the very start. So before you've even talked about product or service or what's required, they're already trying to negotiate the price down before you've even thought about it. And everyone has a budget. Everyone has differing opinions on what value for money is, but value for money will shift depending on what service you're getting. And I understand that I've had plenty of clients that are really aggressively price conscious. And I appreciate that because they're upfront about that. But if it's squeezing the conversation on cost before you've even finished understanding what their requirements are and matching and offering to it, then you're going to have a really difficult relationship, because it's always going to be about pounds and pence beyond what you actually deliver to somebody as well. For working alongside a colleague, professional red flags. I think one of the things we need to remember is that some individuals aren't as passionate about progress as we are. Listening to self-development podcast, working on yourself, you'll work alongside people who just want to clock in and do the minimum possible to get paid the same salary year to year. They don't care about growth in that respect, and that's absolutely fine. There needs to be people like that within a workforce. But I would say identify if this is the case and work alongside these people in an appropriate manner. Don't expect the same standard from them as you do from yourself, because you're not going to get it. They don't care as much about what you're potentially wanting to work towards. And I would say a real red flag off the back of that is a colleague that's constantly negative and never brings forth solutions to challenges. Don't get me wrong, a moan is often a good thing, and we can't be too positive and happy-go-lucky and blind to challenges, but we need to come up with alternative ways of working or solutions to challenges. Somebody that never does so is always a challenge and a red flag for me as a colleague. Green flags in sharp contrast, so people that I would want to work with or want to do business with, is basically the opposite of what we've just said there. So a customer who's focused on the outcome and the solutions and the quality of the service that you provide, that's important. Of course, they've got to remain being cost aware, but don't use it as your first and only criteria for making a choice, because I'm going to struggle to work with you if you're only going to talk to me about money from the very, very start. I've got some of my best clients, in my opinion, are people that have said to me phrases like, buy cheap, buy twice, because they acknowledge that immediately they're aiming for quality. Of course, they don't expect to be screwed over on price or not treated fairly, but they're aiming for quality at a fair price, and they're not expecting to deal with somebody that's bargain basement or really, really budget prices. For colleague green flags, I love working with people who seem like they've got a growth mindset and are really focused on moving forward. So key things: are they open to challenge? Do they welcome feeling stretched and pushed? Do they put forward ideas for how you, but also they can get better? And can you have like constructive criticism back and forth to improve each other? I really, really value that. And I'm lucky I've got that at the moment in my current role at David Phillips. Question 17, do you think PTs call themselves coaches to make it look like they are different? So there was a lot of caveats to this question that the individual that asked it, which was really helpful. So thank you for that. In my opinion, in any industry, you should look to differentiate from those that are competing for business with you. From the outside looking into the fitness industry, albeit I've got some very, very good contacts and some insight, I think PTs are people that, by definition, take gym sessions and classes, while coaches are people that provide a broader service that goes beyond the hour in the gym and the actual training that happens. That's just the connotations that I take from the term. So I think using the term coach automatically opens you up to offering a broader service than a training session. And to give an example from the corporate world, in insurance, when I worked in that space, I would call myself a risk advisor rather than just an insurance broker. Again, it gave the impression that there was an understanding between myself and the customer that Colin's going to speak to me about broader topics than just insurance. He's going to talk to me about risks that I can insure and can't insure, and the wider service that's going to cover more bases. It's exactly the same thing as calling yourself a coach rather than a PT, because it undoubtedly shows that there's a broader offering available, and it helps you to drive a bigger business effectively. Question 18, tips on balancing enjoying life, eating out and socializing while maintaining or improving physique. This is going to vary depending on how serious or how fast the level of improvement to your physique you want. So timescales and the extent of which are going to be really important. And I'm going to look at it like dials on a dashboard. So turning those up and down at different times. So if the physique and improvement is up at 100 and the timescales are up at 100 in terms of the really, really stretching goals and they need to happen really, really quickly, unfortunately, the social and the eating out and the partying is going to be turned right down or close to zero, because you're not going to have scope or capacity to have it turned up. Actually, when I was on the Lean Lads podcast as a guest, Ross was speaking about iPhone battery, and it's the exact same thing. If you've got all these different apps running at the same time, your battery is going to go crashing down. Whereas sometimes you just need one or two specialist apps to focus on what you're focusing on. Whereas during like maintenance periods and periods where you're not pushing quite as hard with your physique, there's more opportunity for the other elements of your life to be dialed up or the other apps in your phone to be open. I think reviewing how stretched you are is going to be worthwhile, and also reviewing how worth a particular situation is to you is important as well. So how valuable is the experience you're going to have from socializing and going out and potentially putting a stall on your goals? How important is that? Equally, how important is that slight change in your physique versus a particular occasion or a particular event? For me, in the past, I could be extremely strict on this and almost version the wrong side. Whereas now things like family events and stuff like that, where a slice of cake or a bit of a later night, it's just part and parcel, and you just accept the experience is more important than any minor stalls or halts to your progress. And equally, weeks and months are huge periods with so much different scope for mitigation around that, if that's what you want to do. If it comes to a diet and the goal is quite strict and quite hard, I'm a big fan of just getting it done. Doing more sacrificing over a short period and going a little bit harder and finishing sooner and being quite strict will free up room for maneuver afterwards and down the line, especially if you get quite lean. You give yourself more scope, because if you put on a tiny little bit, you don't really notice too much, and you've still got loads of room to go back to where you started. Question 19, what made you start your podcast, and any advice to someone wanting to start one? What made me start, and this will be a familiar story to some people, was 5 or 6 guest appearances that I did in the first half of 2019, where I went on some podcasts talking about fitness and how I fitted it alongside my career with my content creation and all the different things that I was doing. And each time that I shared the link on Instagram to these episodes, people in my audience from Instagram were saying, "Oh, loved you on that." And I was coming off loving the experience as well and thinking that my skill set in work, presenting and talking, was very similar, and I think I can add value in this space. And it took me a little while to really bite the bullet. Right, actually procrastinated right up until we got locked inside in March 2020 and released the first episode on the 1st of April. Thankfully, it wasn't an April Fool's, it was serious and we're still going. But that's what made me start the podcast, because I thought I could deliver value in this space, and I'd delivered some good guest appearances, and my skill set and work linked into being able to talk at length, hopefully fairly coherently. Alongside that, advice for me would be to practice presenting or speaking, as I did in work, or outside of that, if it's with whatever opportunity you have, whether it's presenting to groups in a charity sector or the sporting sector or whatever it is. Practice being able to communicate well, and that'll serve you well when it comes to recording on a podcast. Really try and groove that skill. And in terms of other advice I would give, have an idea of what you want the podcast to be like, in terms of where's it going to go, what kind of guests you're going to speak to, or is it going to be simply solo episodes? And what are those first 10 episodes going to look like? How are you going to conduct those? Who do you want to speak to? What are the topics you're going to cover? And what time scale do you want to release those over? Are you going to be a weekly podcast? Are you going to be a fortnightly podcast? Are you going to be a monthly podcast? What is that going to be? One of the most interesting stats around podcasts is that 12% of podcasts have only published 1 episode, and 50% of podcasts have published less than 15. So the trick really is not to give up and to be consistent. And you have to have the confidence in terms of your skill set, but also the preparation to stick it out and progress. Question 20, very much tongue in cheek, this one. How much would you want your OnlyFans to start at monthly? It's not a platform that I'm looking to get involved in personally, so I couldn't possibly put a figure on it. It would just be speculation. I know some people make fantastic money from it and they're doing very, very well. And if that's where they see their career, the income for the foreseeable future, then all power to them and completely carry on with that. As a bit of inside info, I do know someone in particular who made a lot of money initially in her first few months, but the subscription started to drop off and people started requesting some very niche and potentially even more compromising content for additional fees and such. And that, for me, is something that people should be aware of in that space. I'm not sure how it all works personally in terms of how able people are to request different things and reach you and message people. But anything of that nature, there's going to be some quite unusual people behind that paywall in that space who may verge on the extreme end of taste of what they like and what they find desirable. And the guys and the girls that are creating content in that space, they can either choose to cater for that or not. And if the money dries up, they may be forced to behave in a more extreme manner. And that would obviously worry me if I was involved in that space, but that's certainly not something that I'm thinking about at this stage. Question 21, tips to get myself back into a good routine / relationship with food and fitness. For context, this question comes from somebody who owns their own business and is incredibly busy and stretched, but also somebody that's trained a lot over the years and got in some crazy shape at times as well. I would look at generating more time within a busy diary through outsourcing the areas that you can. That could be administration or paperwork or social media within your work to help promote your business. Or it could be cleaning or meal prep or gardening within your domestic life, whatever frees up more time within your working week and your life outside of work. That will enable you to review your diary and commit to some non-negotiables around your training and your food, and making sure that it's enough to stimulate you and will get the benefit from your training. I know that you've trained 5 or 6 days a week and been very, very shredded at one point. So it can be quite hard to go from attaching that as what training and fitness and health looks like to doing something that's less intense, but it still needs to feel worth it. For me, knowing the benefits of well-being and the benefits in your longevity and the benefits that combat stress and career and business burnout, even something like 3 days a week, full body, is attainable to fit within and would still give significant benefits going from where you are now, where you've kind of dropped off your training entirely, to something like that is going to be a step in the right direction and still be enough while not being perhaps the level that you used to approach with your health and your fitness. Question 22, can you wear black shoes with a navy suit? Yes, you absolutely can. Brown brogues or navy suit is a very traditional Rangers quote unquote staunch look. But when working in the insurance industry, it was drilled into me that black shoes with navy was actually the style and it was a standard for formal business. The phrase no brown in town was something that I got told when I went to London, and it was used for when you went to business meetings around the country. You were to wear your navy suit, black shoes, and that was the go-to in terms of attire. My general rule that I've introduced would be for formal business, I would wear black shoes with my navy suit, but for social events like weddings, race events, or even less formal stuff like potentially attending hospitality at the football, then brown brogues with the navy suit is of course a good look. Question 23, how have you found the dating scene since restrictions have eased? Are they thirsty? Now that's very presumptive, and I don't think thirst would apply just to guys or girls actually, because if we think back to the end of the first lockdown, which I'll go into in this answer, I don't think it was just from one side where people were feeling a bit thirsty and a bit frisky. I think last summer when things calmed down, that was when I noticed Instagram was at its most wild in terms of people being extremely forward in the DMs, who previously you would have thought would have been more reserved and maybe are actually a bit more reserved again now. But since last summer, I think once it became clear that the pandemic, particularly for our age group and demographic, for the people that mostly listen to this podcast, wasn't massively threatening, especially if you didn't live at home with at-risk individuals. I don't think people locked down in the same way ever again after those first 10 weeks. So I don't think there was the same level of like cabin fever if you were single that built up in those initial kind of early stages of the lockdown. And I don't think the thirst was there as much after that. Equally, I think if this period did teach us anything, particularly the kind of period of like the most heavy restrictions where people were maybe a bit more adherent to that, it's to maybe be more direct with our intentions anyway, and try not play too many games or have too many things holding us back. So yeah, the dating scene has been fine since restrictions have eased. I think there's more options. Again, I actually quite enjoy a walking date. I think you can get to know somebody quite well in that environment, and there's no kind of frills or filters to put up in that space, or any like alcohol or anything that can mask what somebody's personality is truly like. So I think that can be quite helpful. Question 24, favorite ever Rangers shirt and why? I think I've answered this on maybe my first solo podcast, or first solo podcast Q&A. But for me, it's the 2002-2003 home top. It was the year that Rangers won the treble with Barry Ferguson as captain. I was primary 6 at school, and I had my name on the back of my strip for the first time, Cambro 10, I think it was maybe. And I've just got good memories of running around my friend's back garden, reenacting some of the goals and enjoying myself, albeit not very well, because despite my heritage and who my grandpa is and my kind of bloodline and tradition of football, I am not good at football at all. I have 2 left feet. I have no talent whatsoever. And although I was having fun in my friend's back garden, I was definitely not a top player at all. I actually got one of these strips from a retro site for my 25th birthday from Ian a few years ago, and it was great to kind of relive that. So I've got fond memories of that top. I think it's quite a nice looking top as well. It's like one of the NTL tops. It's got a collar on it, and I guess it's just got very good memories for me. Right, another Rangers question, and at this point, please bear with me because there's one more question after this. 25, Hollander's goal or Ryan Jack's in the Old Firm? Which did you celebrate more? Okay, so obviously Hollander's was the most recent, so there's some recency bias here, and that can play a role to make you think that was better or more heightened, or it can go the opposite way where you kind of have blue tinted or whatever tinted spectacles on the goal from previous. But I think Jack in 2018 was more of a milestone goal, because at that point Celtic were the team to beat and they were the team to dethrone as champions. And just 7 months before that game at Ibrox under Gerrard, Rangers were beaten 4 and 5-0. 4-0 at Hampden, I think it was, 5-0 at Parkhead, and it could have been 9 or 10. We were completely out of it. So it was a huge shift to go from that to dominating Celtic in a game at Ibrox, and albeit only winning 1-0. But for Jack to take that chance and win 1-0, it was a huge goal. And it was a big step change towards Rangers starting to come back and win titles again. Now, obviously, I went mad when Olander scored as well, but I think the Jack goal was probably the big one for me. I think the release of that was significant. I think as an aside, and to caveat those answers, I watched both of those games on TV with friends in I think in my flat and in a friend's flat. If I'd been at the game for either of those, whichever one I'd been at the game for, I'd probably have voted for, because I would probably have gone a bit more mad. I just think that's the nature of being in a live stadium. But last question, and it's not football or Rangers related. When can we expect the video with Jude to release? So that was filmed a good few weeks ago now. It's an interesting project. It's very creative, very different to the other 2 videos that I've done with Jude. It's a bit more about the creative process behind the podcast, which I'm sure we've really done well. I've seen the first draft of it. It looks amazing. Jude's going to make some tweaks. He's a very meticulous perfectionist, and I love that about him. And I'm really excited to see the final copy of it. So that'll be coming soon. Depending when you listen to this, I suspect it will be out by the end of September at the very, very latest. But that's a wrap. 26 questions answered. An interesting mix of questions in there. Hopefully you've all enjoyed that. As I said, I'm continuing to love the podcast process. I'm continuing to be excited about the guests that I've had, even though I had that lull of 2 weeks of not recording, which is kind of the longest time I think I've gone since March 2020 when I started without recording. I'm pleased to say that we've got some brilliant guests coming up. Your support means absolutely everything to me, and it enables me to keep moving forward. If you get the chance, please ping the link of an episode onto a friend that you enjoy, rate me 5 stars, and I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.